first is gentleman.
Peter, there was a wonderful, cogent and thorough chronology of events which you weren't allowed to give on the Big Question TV programme.
I said I sometimes have 10 minutes. There I had about 2. Yes.
There was one gap, and that
Yes.
is the dates at which the Israelis developed their own nuclear capabilities and the interaction with the Americans that led to that.
Yes. Well, this happened in the 60s. President Kennedy first got wind of this in the early 60s. I think the Israelis acquired a reactor from the French. We've been talking all up to now about making bombs out of highly enriched uranium, but as many of you know, you can also make them out of plutonium, and that's how the Israelis started. They acquired this reactor from the French, which was good at producing plutonium. Some are better than others. And the Americans said, we really don't want you to do this. But then Kennedy, of course, sadly was assassinated. And LBJ wasn't as tough on the Israelis, partly because he had some very close friends who were Jewish, who were busy whispering in his ear. And so in the end, the Israelis got away with it. And probably in 1967, around the time of the, I think we call it the 6 Days War, June 1967, more or less at the same time, they acquired their first weapons. And since then, and it's a great source of grievance in the developing world and on-the-line world, we kind of periodically say to the Israelis, really, you guys ought to join the nuclear non-proliferation treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state, and of course we mean it, but they know that we're not really going to make much of a fuss about it.
A few months ago, there was a big scare because the Iranians were about to put their nuclear facilities underground, and that would make it very difficult for the Israelis to hit it. What kind of brakes do you think that either the Americans or ourselves can put on Israel to stop them being too trigger happy?
Yes. Well, I think that on that front too, the last few months have been pretty reassuring because several former members of either the Israeli intelligence community or the Israeli armed forces have been saying two things to their political masters. First, it's actually not necessary to bomb Iran because Iran is not building nuclear weapons and has not decided to build nuclear weapons. So we've got lots more time to affect their decision-making process through diplomacy and negotiation. And secondly, don't delude yourselves. We stand no chance of totally destroying Iran's nuclear program such as it is, and by bombing them we will give them a perfect excuse to withdraw from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty because they will have faced a threat to their supreme interests and start using whatever technology they have to make weapons. So and I'm sure that these people have been saying that in part because they've been talking to their American counterparts, and their American counterparts have been saying to them, would you please speak up and try and get a grip on your political leaders.
Joyce.
There are other people besides states involved in all this. You have referred to, not using the term, the media, and the media's lies and misconceptions plugged in. So the media, the arms industry, which has enormous strength, enormous wealth, international reach, and profits by wars, and not Israel itself, but the massive Zionist movement around the world, not least in the USA, which doesn't listen to reason at all. And I sometimes wonder what chance states have of making sensible decisions and creating peaceful outcomes and getting to yes when these three particular powers are all the time trying to work in a contrary direction.
I agree with you 100%. I find it very distressing how frequent is or how prevalent is this misreporting of the Iranian situation in the media. And like you, I ascribe at least some of it to the influence of groups, to Israel's influence, one way or another. Either because the publishers of these media outlets are Jewish and are sympathetic to the Israeli government, or are manipulated by them, or whatever. And on the what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, one perhaps mustn't exaggerate it, but it does exist, and I think it's particularly noticeable in this context with reference to missile defense. There are big doubts about the viability of those missile defense systems, but the manufacturers of those systems have been able to persuade the Pentagon that it's a good idea to install them in the eastern Mediterranean, where they are supposed to be there in order to intercept nuclear-armed Iranian missiles that would otherwise be winging their way towards Europe.
You first, please.
Yes. Peter, you said a fair bit about the hostility between the US and Iran. How do you reconcile this continuing hostility with the fact that the Americans are still the only country in the world who refuse to delist the MEK as a terrorist organisation? The UK has, but the EU has, the rest of the world has. The only other two countries that see the MEK as terrorists are the US and Iran.
Well, I didn't realise they delisted them, I must say. Yeah. I'm a bit horrified by that. Funnily enough, there was a report just 3 days ago, didn't hit the mainstream media, but I subscribed to a sort of network of Iran specialists, that the State Department was girding itself up in order to delist the MEK. And people were saying, it's a terrible time to do that. Quite apart from the merits of the issue, with Baghdad only a week ahead, a week off. I don't know why anyone would want to delist the MEK, because I really do think there's quite a lot of evidence that they have been involved in this assassination of Iranian scientists. Which
Not something that has been proven in the court of law.
No, it can't be proven.
Anyone in the world.
No, it can't be proven. But I find that repugnant, really, the assassination of innocent scientists who are not in the process of making bombs. But even if they were making bombs, I'm not sure that it would be.
But why is the presupposition that the MEK is responsible? It's not been proven in the court of law.
Well, what is the court?
There is no evidence at all against the MEK. It's only hearsay.
That's true.
And probably the word of the Iranian authorities.
Maybe. I don't know.
There was a question.
The problem is that because the Americans are the only ones that, or give this terrorist name to the organisation, it enables the Iraqi security forces as agents of the Iranians, because basically I think Iraq now is operating in the colony of Iraq, moving around because whatever the Iranian government wants.
Well, we can have a discussion about that.
It enables them, using this terrorist label, to kill innocent members of the MEK or their allies that have lived in Camp Ashraf or Baghdad. They've killed them in the last 2 years.
Could you bring this to an end? Because there are several other people who want to ask questions.
I was wondering if people
Okay, finish off, not a long conversation.
Well, I mean, you clearly have a different perception of the MEK from mine. It's not a subject I've studied in depth, so you probably have, and therefore maybe your view is better than mine. But it slightly surprises me. That's all.
No, please. There are several other people first. You first.
It is a mistake, and a distressing and distasteful mistake, to equate Jewish with Zionist.
It's totally different.
As you have done.
Uh-huh.
No.
Would you like me to apologise to you? I didn't make it in any...
I don't want you to apologise to me. I'm simply saying you've made a mistake.
Okay, fine. I made a mistake.
I don't think you said that.
No, I did use the word Jewish proprietors of newspapers,
Right.
but
Yes.
they are Jewish. I wasn't saying that they... I don't know what's offended him, but I'm sorry I've offended him.
Yeah, I think you were next.
So a question about the credibility of Anglo-American bloc when they're placing pressure like this on Iran, given history, and one thing that you didn't allude to was Mohammed Mossadegh, which I think is a pretty important part of why Iranian people might feel like they've got their backs up against it a little bit. The US State Department and Hillary Clinton is not somebody that I place a great deal of faith in, but her advisors are saying that Iran is a rational actor. I don't believe the Likud party to be rational actors necessarily, and I don't think that the Saudi monarchy is that either. So the way that I see this, that it is going to be an election stunt for Netanyahu. If there is war with Iran, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, as to what you think the chance of him acting completely irrationally, yeah.
In the run-up to the elections that he's called in September. I take some comfort from the fact that there was a poll in Israel quite recently which suggested that really only quite a small minority of Israelis would be in favour of an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities unless Israel had operational support or was acting actually in tandem with the United States Armed Forces. Since I can't imagine that the United States, President Obama, will countenance any kind of American operation in advance of this year's American elections, I think that it's relatively on balance unlikely that Prime Minister Netanyahu will launch an attack this year.
Yes, do you want to think next?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your fair presentation of the case. The question that I have is why do you think United States and Britain are not willing to recognize and publicly acknowledge the Iranian state's right to have peaceful nuclear technology? It's my feeling that if that happens, that would make a great step toward a rather peaceful settlement of the dispute. I was wondering how important it is, in what sense it is important that it constitutes a freedom of speech of all these important issues in the world. There are only two things: Afghanistan and the question of nuclear energy in Iran.
John, could you give the gist of that, because people here couldn't hear?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Just give the gist of that, because people here couldn't hear.
Could you give
Yes, well, there was an interesting point about the speech which the Queen gave in Parliament just last week, in which she only referred to two foreign policy issues, Afghanistan and Iran. That's very interesting. But the more important, I think the real question was, why do the United States and Britain find it so hard to accept Iran having a peaceful nuclear program?
Publicly.
Or to acknowledge publicly Iran's right